Hello, welcome back, all of you innovators. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Rodney Hess. I am the president of Rally Marketing. We are a full-service digital marketing agency. We have been a marketing partner for Innovate South since its inception. And today, before I introduce our next amazing speaker, who I'm so excited to introduce, at 4 o'clock, Rally will be having a speed marketing portion of Innovate South. Now, what that means is if you have questions, concerns, pain points, if you just want a complete review of your current digital marketing efforts, we will give that to you for free in a very quick way. So stick around at 4 p.m. to get some good info. Just if you want to do it, you can just drop it in the chat when it starts, and we'll just get going from there. Also, reminder to come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the Get Started Medical Pitch presented by Cox Business, where you can watch 7 startups pitch their healthcare innovations and compete for up to $40,000 in cash prizes. And if you attend, you have a chance of winning a really cool smartwatch. So, on to our speaker. Melanie Deziel is a keynote speaker, author, award-winning branded content creator, and lifelong storyteller on a mission to share the power of compelling and credible content with others. Melanie is the director of content at Foundation Marketing and the author of best-selling marketing and business communications book, The Content Fuel Framework: How to Generate Unlimited Story Ideas. Prior to joining Foundation, Melanie was the chief content officer of StoryFuel, the first editor of branded content at the New York Times, a founding member of HuffPost's brand storytelling team, and served as director of creative strategy for Time Inc. Please welcome Melanie Deziel. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting, and I'm really glad that I got to hear the tail end of that last panel, because I think it was Christina who was talking about the importance of a role that their blog played in the last 2 years or so that we've all been navigating, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you are in a situation similar to Christina, then you probably found that you suddenly maybe had to use content a little bit more than you were expecting, able to have that personal connection, that in-person connection with our audience. We often find that we have to find other ways to connect, and that is where the digital handshake comes in, right? We're having to create content that's going to connect with our audience when we can't physically be there. But I don't know about you all, and let me know in the chat or give a thumbs up emoji response here if this is you. But I sometimes get overwhelmed by the amount of content that we are expected to create. When you think about all these different platforms, you've got Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, and now we're on TikTok, and we're doing Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse and our blog, right? It can get really overwhelming to figure out, what am I going to say in all of these different places? How am I going to continue to share my brand message, connect with the audience in a way that feels unique and feels fresh when, we've got the same product we had last week, and we're still having to find ways to connect and do something new. So the important thing is that we need to talk about having a system for productivity, a system for content productivity specifically. So oftentimes, the other parts of our business or planning, our finances are all very systematized, very systematized. We have quarterly reviews. We have some sort of tool that's organizing the process, keeping our records, right? We're sometimes working with an expert like a CPA or a financial advisor or an outsourced HR professional or your partner at your local bank to keep all these things in order. But many times our content process doesn't have quite the same system built around it. I'm not sure about all of you, and again, let me know in the chat or drop in the Q&A. We can definitely talk more about the specifics for you all toward the end, but many times we're kind of leaving it to chance, to whim, right? When am I feeling inspired? That's when I'll put something on the blog. And I think Christina from the prior panel shared a little bit about that too, saying that, prior to when they needed the blog, it was sort of as needed. When we have an idea or we have a recipe, we'll put it up. But we know that when we have a system, just like with the other parts of our business, we're able to create much more quickly. The problem is that content ideas or coming up with content ideas is a very, very abstract idea. And for most of us, there isn't really a tangible or an obvious step-by-step process. There isn't a clear order of operations. There isn't a dedicated checklist of things we have to do. And that makes it very, very difficult for us to come up with something consistently. And it can often feel like it's a real struggle. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share with you my system that you can use, adapt to your needs, and hopefully put it together, be able to come up with content as you need it. So what we really need to talk about first is that the content ideas, so, it's a vague term that we're using here. Content ideas is really made up of two things. There's two elements here. So instead of thinking I need to come up with a content idea, we're going to focus on coming up with each of these two parts that make up content ideas. The first being focus. Focus is what it is that you're actually going to say in your content. Focus is what you say in your content. That is what you're saying. So your perspective, your approach, the message that you're trying to share. If you're trying to inspire or entertain or inform, the content of your content, right? What is it that we're trying to say and how are we going to say it? That's what we're getting at here with focus. Next, the other half of a content idea, we have our focus. Now we have the format. That's how you say it, how you bring it to life. So we'll go through examples of all of these, but the format is the one that's usually more familiar to us. So we say, we're going to do a video idea, right? That's how our idea comes to life. Or we're going to write a blog post. That's how our idea comes to life, through text. We'll make an infographic, right? Because it's visible and tangible, we tend to think of a content idea as just a format. And we sometimes forget that we should really be focused on our focus. What is it that we're trying to say? What is that message first? So what we're going to do today is actually create a system that allows you to combine different focuses and formats so that you can have lots of prompts to come up with content ideas whenever you need them. So what we're going to go through today is going to be 10 focuses, so 10 different approaches or lenses through which you can tell your stories, and then 10 different formats or 10 different ways you could bring those story ideas to life. And the combination then that you end up with 10 and 10 is 100 possible combinations, or 100 different ways you can tell any story for any purpose that you have in your business. So that's what we're going to do today. Before you maybe panic a little bit, please know that a lot of this information is not actually new to you. And I don't mean that you shouldn't be here or you know all of this already. What I mean is that it's going to feel very intuitive, that you already know a lot of this. You might just be storing it in different parts of your brain. So we're going to organize it in a slightly different way. So it shouldn't feel like a fire hose, like I'm throwing 100 different things at you. Hopefully it feels very approachable, very easy for you to adapt and use. We're going to start by talking about the 10 focuses. And again, these are the ways that we approach our stories, the lenses through which we tell our stories. And the focuses tend to be a little bit more foreign to us. Again, the formats, which we'll get to in a bit, are a little more tangible. But the focuses are really, again, approaches the way that we're going to tell a story. And I think they'll become a little bit more obvious to you as we move forward. We're going to start with 5 that are really familiar to you. The first of which is people. So my guess is, and again, let us know in the chat if this is you, that you may already be telling stories that focus on people, This could be a founder profile, right? It could be talking about the founder of the organization. It could be your customer success stories, or write-ups about your vendors, or spotlights on different employees. Anything that's really focused on people is your people focused content. I see Matt is saying that's your number one focus. That's awesome to hear. People focused content is some of the most relatable content you can create. So anytime you're in a situation where, okay, we need to tell a story about this product launch or this event or, this new initiative, this new partnership, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, who are the people involved in this story, and how can we tell that story by talking through them, by using their experience, by putting them first in our story. Rather than talking about the event, let's talk about the people who are putting on the event and why it's important to them and how they decided to create this event. And I'm seeing, Raleigh Marketing saying here that people is consistently the top performing content for both them and for clients. And I think we see this often, and a big part of it is that it's so relatable. If we're looking at a chart or a graph, I mean, data is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't generally make you feel something, you know? Whereas when you see a story about a person, you find yourself identifying similarities and differences, that you've been through something similar, so you can empathize, or wow, I have that same challenge. I'd love to hear how they solved for that. The connection that we create with content with our audience when it's focused on people is just on a completely different level in terms of relatability. So we want to try to use people focused content whenever we can. But it's not the only one. The next thing you can focus on is what I call basics focused content. Now, basics focused content actually has a sister that comes with it. So we're going to sort of approach the two of these together, basics, and then the next one is details. So the details focused content and the basics are, I don't know if you want to call them sisters or twins or cousins, but they work really well together. Basics focused content is when you acknowledge that you need to provide some introductory level information about a particular topic in order for your audience to connect to it. So this is especially important if you work in a very technical field, a heavily regulated field, a field that involves things your audience won't really be familiar with. That's when we're especially going to need some basics focused content. The same can be true if your buyer is not the user of your product or service, because that means they may not know all of the in-depth details that go along with that particular industry or offering. An example being, if you sell to the CMO, but it's engineers who use a particular product, well, the CMO may not know all of the engineering ins and outs, the jargon that you're going to use. So they're going to need sort of basics focused content to help get them up to speed. But anytime you're creating introductory content, there's a really good chance you can create a more in-depth piece for audience that's either further down the funnel or more advanced in their understanding. And that's why we like to see these two paired, because I always tell folks, anytime you're creating one or the other, there's a good chance you can create the other, that they work really well together in pairs, that if there's a segment of our audience that needs introductory content about a topic, there's probably also a segment that needs more in-depth content about a subject. Now, the next one is product. So product-focused content is some of the stuff that most of us are probably familiar with. A lot of the stuff we create is overtly focused on our product. Now, keep in mind that if you don't sell physical products, this doesn't mean it doesn't apply to you. It just means that your product is probably something a little bit different. So if you offer services, well, your services are your product in this case. If you're a personal brand or an NGO, then what you're selling is whatever action you're trying to get your audience to take, to subscribe to you or donate to you or become a member. Like, that's what you're selling, that kind of experience or conversion. So content about our products is very important. Most of us here, I presume, have some sort of goal for our business, our department, our organization that really drives everything that we do. And it's typically pretty closely related to our product. So we need to have those conversations that are straight up like, here's what we're selling, or here's our features, here's the benefits, here's the details of how you join or how you buy, or the colors, flavors, and varieties of these things that we offer, right? So this kind of content is very, very common and something you're almost certainly already making. I do want to make one note here, though, that a lot of the other types of focuses, the other content that we're going to talk about, can also be product focused. By that, I mean, if we are talking to the designer of the particular product, well, that may be people focused content, but it's the person who designed the product. So it's still product focused in a way. It just is approaching that through a different lens, through a different, a different angle. So the product focused stuff is generally like very, very focused on the details of what it is that we're selling. All right, the next one, the last of our familiar 5 that you're probably already using in some capacity, hopefully, is opinion content. Now, opinion content can be very stressful for a lot of us because we think of opinion as like, columnists that we see, or, commentators on TV, and we think that opinion means you have to endorse a candidate or choose a side in a debate. And that's not the type of opinion content we're talking about. By all means, if that's part of your brand, if you're fighting for a cause and you need to take a stake in some of those big, scarier conversations, please feel free. But opinion content could be as simple as sprinkling someone's judgment into the content you create. So rather than saying, here's the 5 recipes that you should make this weekend, it's the 5 recipes our employees love. Right now, there's that human element. Someone chose this. There's opinion and judgment and preference mixed into that content. So I always like to say you can sprinkle opinion onto some of the content that you may already be creating just by bringing that human judgment into it and making that role clear, that someone has chosen or recommended or made a selection of options, and that human is the one who's bringing this content to you. So these are our familiar 5. Now we're going to jump into 5 that you may not be using quite as often and hopefully give you some inspiration for new types. And again, we're working our way through 10 different focuses, 10 different approaches you could take to telling any story. And this is going to form the first half of our system. Once we have our formats in place as well, you end up with more than 100 possible combinations. So let's jump on to the next one here. The next one, and again, these are different than our familiar 5, we're adding to our repertoire here, is curation. Now, curation is sort of like a museum curator. Anytime you're gathering like objects or like types of content and bringing them all together. So as we approach the end of the year, we're going to start to see more and more curated content. It's going to be the best of the year, the best of Q4. It's the best of the last month, the best of the holiday season, our favorite moments of the year, right? This is a time where we're doing a lot of reflection. And as a result, you're going to start to see more and more of this type of curated content, just collections of similar content. What I would love to recommend to you all is as you start to create more content, which hopefully you're creating some now, maybe you're going to create more as you move forward, to consider curation something you can do regularly to resurface your best stuff. So I would love to see all of you creating toward the end of the year your best content. Like, here's the best episodes of our podcast this year in case you missed it, or here's the best videos we produce, the most viewed videos that we put on our YouTube channel in case you missed it, the funniest TikToks we made this year in case you missed it. Right? We're giving our best stuff a chance, a second chance at catching our audience's attention. So consider curating, a really powerful thing that you can use to resurface your own content as well as others. Now, I have some notes here on some benefits, that it requires fewer resources. Oftentimes, if we're just collecting things we already have or things that we and others have already done, it's a lot easier than creating something new. So this makes it very approachable, even if you have minimal resources. It can also be updated and repeated, as we just talked about, every month, every quarter, every year. But this last point here is that as you're making curation collections of sorts, you have an opportunity to involve many different people in that content, and those folks can become influencers and advocates for your content. A great example of this is, you better believe that every list you've ever seen on the internet of top influencers or must follow people or people you should know in a particular industry or area or space was designed with activating influencers in mind. Because if you have, here's 100 people that you need to follow who are in our industry on Twitter, you can bet that they're banking on at least 50 of those, if not more, tweeting it out to their audience to say, hey, I was featured in this list, or my book was featured in this roundup of 10 you should read, or my company made the list of the top companies to work for. All of these lists are sort of have that virality element built in. So this is something that you can use to your advantage, especially if you have a small audience and you're growing. Curated content that involves people, it's a really good way for you to expand that audience. Next, we have data. So my guess is that some of you probably have some sort of data that you're quoting, whether it's stats about your particular industry or studies that back up why what you do is important. What I'd like to encourage you to do whenever you can is to try to create your own data. I don't mean make up data, that's not where we're going here, but conducting your own studies or examining your own data insofar as it's legal and appropriate for you to do so. Finding ways to create your own data allows for a much bigger opportunity. The best example I like to give of this is, every time they come out with some sort of study that says eating a particular type of food or beverage is either good for you or bad for you, like eating cheese every day extends your life by 5 years, or, drinking 3 glasses of coffee a day increases your rate of heart disease or something like that. You always see that spread everywhere. And it's all driving back to that original data point, that a study by so-and-so or a survey done by so-and-so. That all comes back to that original point. So again, if you're trying to grow your traffic and bring more folks back to your platforms, to your channels, then having your own data and sharing that data out widely is a great way to create some quality links back to where you are, and hopefully earn you some earned media coverage and broader attention for that original data that you came up with on your own with your team. Now, the next one is history. History. Now, this is just a little checklist reminder for us that at least I find this as a marketer, as someone who works in business, I feel like we're always so future focused. And that's important. Like, we need to innovate for the future. That's part of why we're all doing the things we do. However, there are so many high quality stories hidden just behind us. So when you're seeing history on your list of approaches, this is your reminder to think, is there something in the background, in the past, some trend that brought us to where we are now, some growth that we can acknowledge, some origin story that we can uncover by talking about the history of this thing instead of the present or future of this thing? Great example is anytime you see like a big, either national or global event like the Super Bowl or the Olympics or the World Series, right? There's always some really good content that looks back and says, it's been 48 years since a team with this characteristic made it to the finals, or it's been 22 years since this event was held in this location. They're giving you some really interesting background stats by looking to the past of the event instead of just examining the present and future of that event. There's just a good example that hopefully makes it feel tangible for you, that you may be able to turn around and find some good stories hidden just behind you. And the next one is example. So this one is probably the most like, I'm not so sure about this one. So let me give it a little extra time, and please do drop questions in the chat if you need a little bit of extra context. But when we are talking about example focused content, what that means is instead of trying to tell a gigantic story, we are going to find one example of that broader thing, and we're going to tell that smaller story instead as a window into the bigger theme. So a great example of this being, if we are talking about some trend that's happening, we could try to talk about the trend and how it's affecting millions and millions of people, but that's going to be hard for us to relate to. It's going to be hard for us to understand and contextualize. It would be much easier to see, here's a story of one business who is going through this thing. Here's how it's affected them. Here's what they're doing to overcome it. And they are just one of more than X number of businesses in our local area facing this challenge. By using a smaller example, you can kind of bring people along for the journey to where their minds are more open to that larger conversation. So this is a good reminder for us when we're trying to tell a story to say, hey, could I break this down a little bit smaller and tell a smaller story that actually has a bigger impact rather than trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite? Here again, as we're finding these individuals or businesses or other smaller examples, this gives you a really good opportunity to bring in individuals who are experts, to quote experts in this particular trend, or to find influencers who have experienced this thing. It's a really good chance for you to show that. And hopefully, if the folks that you are using as an example are customers or partners of yours, it also gives you a natural opportunity to talk about why it is that they work with you, or why it is that you were able to help them with this particular problem that's more pervasive. So this is really can be a great way for you to approach a big story. Anytime you're like, this is a huge story, how are we supposed to cover this? Example may be the way to go. Now, the last of our 10 focuses, and then I'm going to show them all for you. A nice little screenshot slide here is process. Now, process content is really exciting because we love this stuff. This is recipes, tutorials, DIY content. This is anything that is helping people do a thing. And that could be a physical thing, building, making, cooking, fixing, or it could be a less tangible process, like making a decision or transforming your mindset, right? There are sort of less tangible processes that we all go through, dealing with grief, choosing a college major, right? There's lots of different approaches here. But in short, we're offering people guidance on a process, how to in some way. Now, a really interesting thing, and I know that I believe it was Christina. Please correct me, someone in the chat, or Krista, if I'm wrong here. But who was talking about their website with the recipes, and how at the beginning of the pandemic they saw that there was a lot more search activity for recipes. Now, I don't know whether that's because we were all drinking more at that particular point in history, but it does line up with the data that we saw around that time, which is that as soon as the pandemic hit, there was a drastic increase in search for process focused content. Everybody needed tutorials. All of us were trying to figure things out we had never had to do before. We were faced with challenges we had never had to face before. We were trying new tools and picking up new hobbies and doing things on our own that we normally would have bought or hired out for or anything else. So there was a lot of interest in how-to content, and that has been largely sustained. So there is still great opportunity to capitalize on the fact that people are feeling really independent, really self-confident that they can get things done on their own. So teaching your audience a process, giving them guidance as they're going through a process is a really good opportunity for you to provide a ton of value to your audience. So on our next slide here, you'll see the recap of the 10 that we've talked about here. So this is a good screenshot slide. If you're a screenshot type of person, this is a quick little cheat sheet for you of those 10 focuses. Now, if anyone has questions on these 10, I'm going to pop into the chat here for a moment. Feel free. In a moment, we're going to move on to those 10 formats, the 10 ways we could bring those stories to life. And it's that magic combination of the 10 focuses and the 10 formats that gives us this recipe for sort of unlimited content. But I wanted to pause here for just a moment to see if anyone had questions about the focuses that I could clear up for you before we jump into part 2 of this process that helps us unlock our creativity. I don't see questions coming in. I'll keep an eye out for an extra minute here. But if there's nothing else, then we can go ahead and jump into our 10 focuses, 10 formats rather. Now, before we jump in, I just want to level set here that again, this is going to be very, very familiar. Remember, the formats are the things that we often default to because they're visual, they're experiential. These are the parts of a content idea that we're already familiar with. So don't be surprised if you find yourself going, yeah, I got that. Yep, we do that. Yep, I understand that. Because again, these are the types of terms and use that we're really familiar with. So this should be a good confidence boost to know that you really do have what you need to create all of this awesome content. Just need to organize that information in a new way. So the first here of our familiar 5 is writing. Writing. Now, I don't need to tell you all what writing is. I told you this part was going to be easy. But writing is first because it's often the cheapest, the easiest way for us to bring content to life. So this is often the default for many of us. I don't know if anyone else here feels this way. I studied journalism, so writing is always like my go-to. If I have a choice of how to communicate information, like I'm gonna write about it. I would rather write 5 times as much than have to film a video or do a podcast or something like that because I'm just so comfortable with writing. And that's true for a lot of people. The next one is infographic. This is great if you're a visual thinker. So my guess is some of you are really drawn to a visual type of learning. You like graphs and charts, and the same is true for our audience. So we're going to always think about, is there a way we could bring this to life through visual data by representing it in a graphic way to help bring that data to life in a more visual and tangible way. The next of our familiar 5 is audio. And I want to pause here to point out that I did label it audio and not podcast because I want you to like take the vision that you have of audio as a tool for podcasts and just expand it out because there is so much more you could be doing with audio. First off, if you are creating content in other formats, like writing a blog article, for example, there's no reason you can't have someone record reading that so that someone has the option to listen instead of just reading it, right? So audio is a great duplication format when you're creating other stuff, but there's also a great opportunity to use environmental sound. Now, when I say environmental sound, I mean like the normal natural sounds that are happening in any given situation. So I don't know if, does anyone else feel like, cafes or coffee shops is kind of like their ideal work environment? Anybody else on that wavelength? Because that's definitely me. That's where I tend to get a lot of my best work done. So I was really missing that when we all first went into I almost said hibernation. It felt like it when we went into quarantine and lockdown. Luckily, I found a tool called Coffeetivity that allowed me to stream sounds of a cafe. so I could still get that environmental sounds, the sounds of the espresso machine and like a light murmur of conversation, occasional door opening, that good environmental sound that got me right into the right headspace for working. So there's a lot of ways that you can do sound effects, you can do environmental sound. So don't underestimate the power of audio beyond just being used for a podcast. Next on our list of familiar 5 is video. And again, see, I told you, I don't need to tell you what video is. We're using video right now. What we're actually using is live video, which is the next one on our list. So I want to point out that these two are here separately because they are both incredible tools, right? Recording a video and sharing that with an audience at some other point in time, or broadcasting live like we're doing here, both have a lot of value. But we should choose which one we're going to use with intention because they're not interchangeable. They each have their own advantages and disadvantages. So it's worth reminding ourselves as we're going through the list of ways to bring our stories to life. Could this be a video, like we record it and share it later? Or should this be a live video? Or maybe we do both. Maybe we do it live and then share it recorded after. So having them separate is a good reminder for us to think, which is going to be the best call in this case. Now, my gut says that a lot of you probably already know some of the risks and benefits associated with each, but just to give you a quick rundown, one of the benefits of recorded video is obviously you have more time to edit. You can often improve the quality of the visuals or the sound. You can add captions to it. You can edit other footage in, give it background music, right? You have a lot more freedom to impact the quality of the piece that you're putting out. And you have lots of time to review it and make sure that nothing that you don't want in there is in there. The benefit of live video is that it gives us this ability to interact. The fact that when we get to Q&A, we're going to be able to talk to one another and answer questions. I mean, that's a real powerful benefit to have that live interaction. However, it does introduce some risks. I don't know how many of you may have seen this, but there was a video that went around a few months ago of a lawyer who had joined their court case via Zoom. It was a virtual court appearance of some kind. And this poor lawyer had the cat filter on them. So their face was showing up on screen for this court appearance as a cat. And they were unable to fix that. They couldn't seem to figure out how to get the cat filter off and had to say the words to the judge, sir, I am not a cat. I am ready to proceed. And so, there are certainly some risks associated with live video. You could have quality issues, the internet drops out, or the connection isn't great, or my headphones stop working, or my cat comes in here and knocks a light over, right? There's lots of things that could go wrong. So we want to be mindful of making sure we're choosing either video or live video in a way that is aware of all those benefits and risks. So now we're going to move on to 5 that are probably a little less familiar for you. And we're going to do the next, image gallery. So image gallery is here because I think most of us have seen, at least when we're creating a lot of our blog posts, we know that adding an image is generally a good idea, right? We want something to show up in that preview on social media, or we just know that people might pay more attention to it if it catches their eye. But I think too often we stop short. We just drop one image in there and then we call it a day. And there's a lot of opportunities where we may be able to add multiple images or a collection of images that is going to make it more engaging and make it a lot more fun for people to see. Now, think of some in-person events that you may have been to, and you get maybe an email newsletter afterward or something afterward, and it has just one photo from the event, and you're peeking around and you're like, oh man, I'm not in that photo. They didn't catch my table or my section of the audience or whatever the case may be. How much more fun is it when you get a whole album of like 100 photos from the dinner or the event, and you get to click through and you're like, oh yeah, there's my friend, and oh, I had coffee at that little coffee area over there, and oh, there's me, talking to my colleague. So the power of having a whole gallery of related images can be really, really engaging. Back when I worked at the Huffington Post, one of the things we found, and I always caveat, I don't know how true this data is now, but at least at the time, what we found is that if someone hit the 3rd image in a slideshow, they were almost guaranteed to go all the way to the end. Because if you care enough to look at 3 images, you care enough to keep going and to look at 27 or 36 or 84 pictures. whatever it was we were serving up at HuffPost. I assume that your slideshows may be slightly more targeted, with a little bit more incentive to look through your content. But it is something that we found. Next on our list is timeline. So timeline, I think, is probably one of those formats that I would guess, and please prove me wrong, if anyone has used a timeline to bring content to life, please let us know in the chat. Really cool stuff often is coming to life through timelines. But I think we forget about this sometimes. And in many cases, the stories that we are telling, whether it's, say, our founder's origin story or our company history, all of these things unfold over time. There's multiple points in time in that story. And while it may be super familiar to us, our audience doesn't have as much experience with that history, and they may have a hard time keeping those order of operations, in the correct order, especially if we're jumping around and not just giving them a chronological story. So plotting things on a timeline can be really beneficial for our audience, especially because it gives them the opportunity to sort of explore on their own. They can look back and look forward and kind of make it a more self-directed experience, which users tend to really enjoy, and it tends to make them stick around a little bit more because they feel more in control of their content experience. The other thing is that's great about this, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, you can put other types of content on the timeline. So your timeline at different points could have writing or video or audio or images, a whole gallery. Those can appear at the different points in the timeline. So it's sort of like a super format that lets you bring in lots of different content. Super valuable. But it's not the only format that I think isn't getting enough love. I'm throwing quiz out here as an option. And I know sometimes people have sort of a cringe reaction to a quiz, and they're thinking like BuzzFeed style of quizzes where it's like, I don't know, tell us your Starbucks order and we'll tell you if you're going to die alone, or like what Friends character you are, or, something dramatic and entirely unrelated. While those can be a lot of fun, it's hard to see a business application. Really hard to see how you might be able to use that as a business. So I'll give you some more business oriented examples so you could see the benefits. One of the best things you can create is a quiz style experience that allows your audience to choose which product or service tier or subscription type is right for them, right? Or which cause they should sign up for, which committee they should join. By asking a series of questions about them and helping them figure out what's best, you're increasing the chances that they are going to get from consideration to conversion. You're making it easier for them to figure out what their next step should be, and you're making it feel customized and special to them, which we know tends to create deeper engagement in any sort of sales or conversion process. So these kinds of quizzes that help you pick which is right for you can be really beneficial. But there may be other things too. You could test your audience's knowledge of something. This is something you could use to qualify your leads and determine whether someone is a good fit. Test their knowledge of how well they understand the particular industry or area, or even your offerings. And then based on their answers, you can serve up more content that helps fill those knowledge gaps. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities to create, engaging quiz experiences with our content. So having it on a list of reminders is a good way to make sure that we don't miss out on those opportunities. And the next one is a tool. And this is sometimes an area where there's a little bit of pause, like, well, is a quiz a tool? What's the difference between a quiz and a tool? So I'm going to break it down like this. When we create a quiz, we know what all the answers are, and we're determining ahead of time how one gets to a certain answer. So, there's only 6 products that you might get, or however many Friends characters that could be the result of your quiz. We know there's a set and finite number of answers that have been defined by us. With a tool, that's not the case. We have determined the formula or the calculation that's happening. We don't even know all the possible combinations. So an example here might be, if anyone works in social media, my guess is you've used a character counter of some kind. I think we're all guilty of typing character counter into Google and just pasting our social posts there to make sure they hit our minimums. It's a really useful tool. You might have used a converter tool of some kind, to figure out what one thing is like in another time zone for a Zoom call, or to make a recipe double or triple, for example. You may also have used more image-based tools, like some of the apps that went around, especially while we were all in quarantine, that made our faces older or changed our gender expression or, made us into aliens or something, right? These sort of photo tools that made some sort of change. We can't possibly see every possible outcome with a tool like that, but we can set up a set order of steps so that when the audience gives an input, they get a somewhat reliable output. So that's what a tool is. And this is often a really helpful thing to help your audience put themselves in an imagined position. So if you're trying to get them to make a change, to take out a loan, or to commit to something, helping them do a calculation that lets them see what that would mean for them, like an interest calculator or a loan payback calculator, or how many of these items would you need to fit your space, right, is a great way to, again, help them down that journey to seeing themselves in the final state you want them to be in. Now, the last of our formats here, and again, we're about to combine these and it's about to get really idea full in here, is a map. You all know what maps are. I don't have to tell you what map is, but what I do want to do is hopefully expand your thoughts about how you might be able to apply them to your content and how you could use them to bring your content to life. Most of us think of maps in purely a navigational context, right? This is a map to get to my friend's house, to get to our vacation spot, to get around town to the new coffee shop or something. But you can also create maps that are not intended for navigation, but for demonstration. So an example of this might be if you do something in the home, you might have sort of a blueprint of a house showing where certain things should be. Here's the range of our particular product and how much of your house it might cover. Here's a map of a yard and where we recommend planting these types of plants. There's lots of different ways you can approach giving some sort of visual, spatial example of something. Another example, really tangible, is Gillette, the razor company, put out a piece of content that was actually a map of the face. And they were talking about the direction in which men's hair typically grows on the face so that you could map out your shave to perfectly hit the right direction of hair. So you can make maps of lots of things that aren't just roads and destinations. So those are our 10 formats. You're going to see all 10 of them listed here. This is another good screenshot slide for you. This is that list. Again, those familiar 5 on the left and the 5 potentially new ones that we just walked through here. Now, this is where the magic happens, because we already talked about, we know that a content idea is one focus plus one format. We'll talk about combining them in a bit. That's where the real magic happens. When we plot those on a matrix, we end up with something like this. Now, all this is, again, it looks a little scary. All this is those formats are down the left-hand side. So you see writing, infographic, audio, video, etc. And those focuses we talked about for your content are across the top. So you'll see people, basics, details, history, process, etc. What you see here is 100 possible combinations, the combination of each possible focus and each possible format. So when you have this tool belt that includes the 10 focuses and the 10 formats, you have already at your disposal 100 ways you could tell any story. So that makes it really easy. You've got an upcoming product launch and you say, all right, could we talk about the people who built the product? Absolutely. We should probably create some basics content about how it comes to life. Maybe a how-to post, a process-focused post on setting up the product, right? You can kind of walk through each of those focuses. And then once you've identified the focuses you'd like to use, you can run down the list and say, okay, now would that work well as a written piece? Probably need something a little more visual. Maybe a video works well, or an image gallery works best. So this just gives you sort of so you're not starting with a blank slate. You've got this checklist of options that you can run with and try to find, some possible options that would work for you. So this is how we get to 100. But I want to promise you that you can actually do 200 or 500 or more in a single sitting with very little additional effort. So on the next slide, I'm going to introduce you to something called a multiplier. So there are 4 multipliers, and each of these can be used to turn one idea into many. So here are those 4. The first one is time. So remember, we talked about you curating a list of like our best videos. Multiplying by time would mean we're not just doing our best videos of October, we're doing our best videos of November, our best videos of December, our best videos of the fall, our best videos of 2021. That's the same content idea, but you have now turned it into 5 by applying different months, different times of year, and the full year. That's how we turn one good idea, like our best videos, into 5. But there's other ways you can multiply your content too. So demographic is one example. If you are doing a piece of content on, tax season is coming up in early next year, and you're doing most common tax mistakes, that's a great idea. We want to help people, our customers, our audience, avoid tax mistakes. But different people might make different tax mistakes. So here's the most common tax mistakes for families, for businesses, for single parents, or for students, for individuals with multiple children, for homeowners, right? There might be so many different demographics that would use a customized version of that idea. Now, just like we were with the time multiplier, the content is going to be different for each of these. I am not proposing that you have your one list of tax mistakes and you just put a different title on it to appeal to different people. That wouldn't be great. But if you know that the content of that idea would be different for different people, then you can multiply it by those demographics and create 10 pieces of content from that one idea of common tax mistakes. You can also do this by location. So curation is a really easy one here, but imagine that you're doing, top destinations for a weekend trip. Now you might do, I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. So I might do the top day trips or weekend trips within North Carolina, within the Carolinas, on the East Coast, within our time zone, in the South. You could kind of adapt based on the different areas that are nearby. And much like when we talked about with maps, it doesn't have to be just geographical locations. You could talk about places in your home, the best, $20 updates you could make to your bedroom, to your office, to your kitchen, to your kids' room, to your garage, right? And the last one is resources. So resources is easiest to understand in the context of like a gift guide. So if you're doing, top holiday gifts, and you wanted to do, okay, here's the top gifts under $20 and the top gifts under $50, the top gifts from $1 to $200. I don't know, top gifts 500 and above. You can really adapt that based on money as a resource that would change the information within that content piece. Recipes is another place where resources come into play. So here's this particular recipe, but if you don't have a hand mixer, or here's that same recipe, but gluten-free. Here's that same recipe, but it doesn't have nuts in it this time. Or here's that recipe if you don't have an oven and you need to do a no-bake version of it, right? Just by changing the resources that are available. So when we take these multipliers and we apply them to the grid that we had before, now instead of 100 ideas, we could come up with 300, 500 or more ideas just by using these same ingredients that you already know and love. By looking at the 10 focuses that we walked through and the 10 formats that we walked through, you end up with over 300 possible combinations. Now, before you're like, I do not have time to make 300 pieces of content. Melanie, what are you doing? I hope my boss doesn't hear about this. The goal is not to make all of these things. Please don't stress yourself. That is nowhere near the goal. The goal is to make it easier for you to come up with ideas so that you can choose the best from among them. I never want you to be in a situation where, what should we post? What should we do? And you end up doing something that you're not proud of, or isn't your best work, or your audience doesn't really like, or honestly just isn't very aligned with your goals out of necessity because you didn't have something else to go to. So by using a system like this, which remember, we talked about how productivity comes from having a system, you will be able to come up with content ideas that serve your needs anytime you need, and you will never find yourself in that position of saying, God, I don't know what to post. What are we going to do? Our accounts are going dry, are going vacant, right? So hopefully what this system does, by using the focuses and using the formats as a grid system, and then occasionally using some multipliers to help create even more ideas, you will make it so that you never run out of ideas again. And you feel confident that anytime you need to create content to connect with your audience or promote your product or reach your desired audience, you're going to be able to come up with countless ways to do that at the drop of a hat. That's really what the system is all about. And that is all that I wanted to share with you all today. If you're really into this and you want to dig into it, I wrote a whole book about it. So there's a chapter in that book for every focus and every format if you want to like dig in and see more examples and exercises. But I also put my social contact info on here too if you want to reach out directly. Happy to answer questions or point you toward resources. But what I'd love to do is see if there's any questions and see if there's anything that I can do to help any of you. If you're having a particular content challenge right now, I would love to see if we could work through it with you. If you're feeling like, man, this won't work for me because XYZ, give me that challenge. Let's work through it right here so that you can still feel like you can go out and create some amazing content. I see Catherine sharing there that they worked for an animal shelter that logged their journey to no kill status through a timeline. That's a really powerful thing to do, right? We are all, as our organizations, we're growing. I do think, company history or some sort of like how we as an organization got to where we are is a fantastic opportunity to leverage a timeline and to like brag on yourself a little bit, right? It's your chance to look back and say, yeah, here's when we hired our first employee. Here's when we expanded our products. Here's when we launched a second location, right? Whatever those achievements are, the awards we won, the partnerships we forged. A timeline is a really cool opportunity for you to look back and show that step by step. And then saying this has been very helpful. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. And it sparked more creativity. When we're stuck on how to create more content. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And hopefully you don't feel stuck anymore, or at least you don't have to be stuck for too long.
Melanie, thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions for you if the audience doesn't. First of all, I just want to let everybody know and remind everybody that you will be getting a link to download Melanie's book for attending today. So you'll have access to that. It'll be in your email probably sometime next week or so. So be on the lookout for that. And also next up, if you do want to participate in some speed marketing, think of your goals, think of your pain points, put them in there. Melanie, thank you so much. I thought this was awesome. I love storytelling. I speak on storytelling all the time.
Yeah.
This is such a simple process that I'd never thought of. And I'm honestly kind of mad that I didn't think about it. So thank you for that. I do have a couple of questions though about some of the focuses that you talked about specifically. So a lot of the questions that I get from people are, I don't want to pull back the curtain too much. I've got either a secret sauce or I don't want to talk about my processes because it's for us. What do you tell people who kind of give you that?
Yeah, well, I never want you to reveal anything that's going to hurt your business advantage or make it impossible for you to do the work that you do. But I'm sure that there are some processes that aren't quite as secretive as they need to be. So if you are having something with a secret sauce or a secret recipe, like people are going to consume that and engage with it and do something with it. And how could we help them with that part? You don't have to tell them your ingredients, but maybe you tell them how to style it or how to put it together, how to set it up, how to make sure they pack it safely, how to repair it if something isn't doing what it should be doing, or how to know, again, like which of these things or where they should put it in their house. Take a step away from yourself and think more of the processes that your audience is going through and what they may be facing, and help them through those challenges instead of giving away your own internal processes. Hopefully that's helpful.
Excellent. Matt Castile is asking, which platforms do you feel are best for B2B companies?
Oh man, that's a big question. So I try not to pick favorite focuses and formats, but I do think that like people focused, especially B2B, I think we get like a little caught up and forget that like a human is still buying our stuff, even if that human represents an organization. And so I love when I see a story being told about a customer, an individual who had a good experience at a competitive organization. So there's the human in the B2B environment, talking about their growth, their success, how we helped them, what they achieved. I think that's really, really compelling in a B2B environment. Because again, you relate to it and you say, oh man, that organization is similar to mine, or we face that same challenge, or my boss, my colleague says that same thing all the time. Maybe they can help us too. It really serves B2B well. From like a social platform standpoint, I think it really depends on the B. Like which businesses are we trying to reach? In a lot of cases, like professional services, LinkedIn is the place to be. But you're trying to reach barbershops, like you need to be on Instagram and probably TikTok, right? So it depends on the business, but I do think LinkedIn is generally a safe bet for anything sort of white collar business and services, as a general rule.
Answer. Thank you. I have another question about your opinion
Yeah.
portion. I know some people can be afraid to share opinions in fear of isolating members of their audience. What would you say
Yeah.
to them?
So that's where we go for the sprinkling of opinion instead of like drawing a hard line in the sand. Because yeah, a big opinion piece like this is why I blank or why I will never blank. Sure, that could be a little polarizing. But in many cases, you know the opinions of your audience. You know what things your audience likes and dislikes and where their views on many things fall. So my guess is there's probably some opinions you can share that you're not going to get a lot of objection for. So let's see. I know someone shared earlier, Catherine shared earlier about the no-kill animal shelter. I'd be willing to bet that that leader of that shelter could certainly share why you shouldn't get pets as a Christmas gift because it leads to abandonment, and no one in their audience is going to disagree with that, right? Or why I think XYZ is good or bad. Knowing your audience probably agrees with you. So there's probably some safe opinions you could share. But also looking for like favorites or recommendations that's the opinion sprinkles. So it's like you were going to create that list anyway, but the recommendations came from employees. The best example of this, I think, is if you go into especially a local bookstore, you'll see like bestsellers and like top new fiction, but you usually see employee recommendations. And so, it's not the entity itself is saying like this is a guaranteed book you'll love. It's saying like, Bill, who curates our mystery section, thinks that this is one you should read, and that's like a little sprinkle of opinion on the otherwise normal book categories.
Jacob also has a question. He says, I find
Sure.
creating all of this content takes up a lot of my time. Do you have any advice for outsourcing content?
Yes, outsourcing can be done, but I always like to warn people that the only way outsourcing will work is if you are giving sufficient prep to those outside people that they can create the kind of content that you could internally. And that's sometimes really tough. So a few options. Number one, batch your content. The analogy I like here is imagine if every time you needed an outfit to wear, you would individually wash that shirt and pants and undergarments and then wear them. We don't want to have our content the same way. We don't want to, oh, I need a blog post, so I'm going to sit down and write a blog post. Create some time, like you do your laundry every weekend. Create a block of time where you're going to create some stuff so that you have it ready for the next week, the next month, the next few days, right? So batch your content so that you have dedicated content time and you can then roll that out over time. The next thing I would say is stop putting so much pressure on yourself. Oftentimes when content is really overwhelming, it's because we're trying to do too much. And I get it. There's a lot of pressure for us to be everywhere, but it is so much better for you to be awesome in one or two places than to be mediocre in 6 or 7 places because you've spread yourself so thin. So sometimes paring back a little bit allows you to give more attention to the places where you're actually going to get, some return on your time investment. Um, let's see. Oh, and the other thing is to repurpose content. So if you're feeling like, man, I'm spending all this time, creating all these different things for every different place, there's probably a lot of opportunities where you could pull bits and pieces from stuff you already have to fill those social channels. So, for example, instead of writing, an amazing tweet every single day, go to one of your good articles and pull out some great stats and some great quotes. There you go. You've got yourself 10 tweets from that single article just by copy pasting. So look for opportunities to repurpose during that time block after you've reduced your pressure, and hopefully it won't be quite so stressful and time consuming.
Excellent answer. One of our favorite things to do is put on events where we just stand up and talk about stuff and put a camera in our face. And then after that, you have audio, you have a blog post, you have all those different things. That recycling is a huge time saver.
The other thing too is I think you probably have like mine your life for content, your work for content. You are probably doing things that you could just show, and that would be the content, not even have to set aside extra time. You see this with craftsmen very often, where you have they're not sitting out to create content. They're just setting up a camera. Now they've got a time lapse of them making their painting or carving their thing, right? So there's probably opportunities for you. Throw on a screen capture, and as you're doing a process, just tell people the steps you're doing. You're already going to do that process anyway, so you might as well capture it. So look for those opportunities to capture what you're doing anyway and turn that into content.
I also got some great advice just this past week where someone told me to just write stuff down, write down your feelings, write down what you're going through, because you might try to write about it a couple years down the road, and you're going to be talking from a completely different place than you were in that moment. So even if you don't use it immediately, you might use it a couple years down the road.
Yeah, I recommend a good, like a Google Doc or some sort of thing that you can access on the go, like shared notes or something. So you could just throw stuff in there when you need it, because then it's searchable too. So when the time comes, you can say, what was that really cool idea I had for a webinar? Or
Well, Melanie, thank you so much. We're out of time now. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for being a part of Innovate South, and we'll see you around. Thanks.
thanks for having me.